Hey there. I thought I would do the jazz in Paris in honor of the Olympics being held there this year. Hang on. I'm using a different input for the camera today. So, hi, welcome. This is story time. Welcome to story time. I am Dr. Jennifer Bird. I am a biblical scholar, and I really enjoy talking about what we find in the Bible and inviting people to think more critically about what they do with what they find in the Bible. I am a former conservative evangelist, not just an evangelical, but an evangelist. And I've been revisiting some of the people, like visiting the spaces mentally, at least, that I used to inhabit when I was on Young Life staff, and kind of online stalking, social media stalking some of the people from those days, and just evaluating life and who I am now, who I was then, and all those relational dynamics that are at work for people. And it's really interesting to think about, all the people I was often interacting with, and thinking about what they would say if they could see some of the work I'm doing. And not, it's good to be in a place where it doesn't matter, but it's all very thought-provoking, if you know what I'm saying. So welcome. Today is I just have wild hair today. It's kind of fun. Today we're going to do a story time on the book of Jonah. Someone asked about that, so I'm happy to do that today. Just a quick heads up, next week I'll also be doing something kind of random, whatever. And then the following week, I'm really pleased to get to bring Heather Hamilton on. We interviewed her for Wild Olive last fall, but I'm excited to kind of have more of an exchange, live conversation with her here in 2 weeks. We'll be going a little earlier in the day on the 15th, or 11 a.m. Eastern U.S. instead of 3 p.m. due to family conflicts she has. But so if you're not able to, join us live that day, please do make an effort to listen later. She's not only just a delightful human, she has a really powerful, interesting story. And what she does with the way she reads biblical passages is just kind of fun and interesting. So I'm excited to have a conversation with her here in 2 weeks. So something to look forward to. I think that's already created actually in the YouTube streams. So anyway, I have been slacking off on all things social media for the last month or so for various reasons. So I'm just delighted that there are some of you who wanted to be here, were able to be here live with me. I very much appreciate that. Thank you for being here. And I didn't come back over to the chat. It's fun to see what you guys have to say. Okay, so you guys are cue the fish jokes, right? Here we go, right? I'm just sharing because I think it's fun, right? Jonah made no sense to me, right? So one of the things I want to do, and hello everyone. Thank you, Pragmatic Crystal. I do have it in the intro, and I appreciate it when friends are saying that in the chat. Thank you. And I'm so glad you made it. I'm Anina. So fun to see you here. So fun to see everyone here. Thanks for being here. Yeah. And so let me ask you, let's take a minute to have you all check in. What is the takeaway? The book of Jonah. What were you taught? I'm going to have to do some stalling here because there's like a 9-second delay, I think, between me saying something and then people in YouTube land hearing it. What were you taught growing up? Were you taught? Did you grow up hearing it? Like, there are plenty of people here who didn't maybe grow up in the church. Did you know about this story as a child or as a young person? If so, what were you told that the story is, the meaning of the story, or the focus of the story? What's the takeaway? Did you grow up? Do you remember at any point as a child being handed a cartoon thing to color in, and it's Jonah and an actual whale? Like, were you ever given that? What was the message that went along with that? Do you remember Sunday school content? And Sunday school applies for Christians and Jews, by the way. They have morning classes for children on Sundays as well. Right. What was it? What's the message here? What is, this book, the book of Jonah, counts as a prophet, right? What is the message? And I'm going to see if someone, it's the Swiss national holiday, which is why we're very pleased that our Swiss friend is here with us today. Oh my goodness, you were in a musical. I feel like I need to sit down and ask you about that. Do you have anything you want to say about that, Quinn? Thou shalt, no delays. That's funny. Yahweh doesn't take no for an answer. That's interesting. Do what you're told or else. It's never too late. Let's see. It's never too late to call for God. He'll hear you. Oh, this is really fascinating. Pictures to color. Yep. Okay. He said no to God and got tormented until he gave in and obeyed. I mean, that is a God you want to get close to, right? Cuddle up with, right? As a 7-year-old, I'm going to put this up. I'm just putting him up without reading him ahead of time. I hope that's okay, since you're putting it in the chat. As a 7-year-old, there was a debate amongst my Sunday school over whether it was a giant fish or a whale. I'm glad to hear that, Hollyhock. That's good, right? Because whales don't exist in the Mediterranean, right? Yeah, so historically. And actually, if you do like a Google search on art and the story of Jonah, it's big fish, even that these painters over the centuries, depicted him being a part of. We were singing fish. Oh my gosh, in the musical. Okay. That's beautiful. Someone built a set and everything. That is good stuff. Yeah. Thank you for that, Nikki. I did not grow up in the church, but at 19 started going as I became saved. It was about following after the Lord. You don't and you aren't good. Wow. Oh, look at this one. You can't escape your responsibilities by running away from them. I almost don't want to put considering a news answer up here because it's a little bit too close to what the real message is. I like putting the ones that are like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry that's what you took away from it. Let's see. Oh, that's good to know, right? Yeah. Interesting. Not good to know. I didn't mean it like that. I guess thank you for that, actually, for that insight. That this is this one that you shared with us. You can't escape your responsibilities by running away from them. I mean, thank you. It's not just Christians that are doing that with that story, right? So I'm just putting it out there because I think it's fair. Considering a new, put it in the comments. So I need to lift it up as well. I love the fictional story of Jonah. Thank you. It is fiction. It sucks to be a prophet, and it sucks most to be the best prophet. And what's interesting to me about that is another question to put back to you all, right? What is it that what was the role of the prophet, right? Is what this particular concept, this particular story brings to the fore for us very beautifully. When I teach Hebrew Bible intros, and I've just gotten to the prophets section actually of this term's course on the Hebrew Bible, and I do enjoy teaching the prophets. I think it's helpful for people to be better informed on them. And I do also invite students after 2 weeks of reading the prophets and focusing on certain aspects of the prophets, then I ask them to write their own prophetic pronouncement, which is really, really kind of fun to see what people come up with there. But of course, the first thing that I want people to know, and that many Christians in that context have a hard time wrapping their head around, and I understand why. It was the same way for me as well. And that is, there are two primary purposes of the biblical prophets. The first was to call out unrighteousness, and the second was to encourage people who were suffering. And the angry yelling stuff out content is about denouncing improper behaviors, and it's always connected to covenant language or the covenant relationship that is implied, that is the people of Israel who are in two groups at this point. The northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, and they take on different names in the different prophets, right? But the general, the content of the prophets that predates the Babylonian exile is predominantly get your shit together, right? Quit abusing your own people, quit exploiting the people, whether it's the priesthood in the temple. I guess I need some water here. Whether it's the priesthood in the temple or the political leaders, right? Stop exploiting people. And the command or the judgment around unjust behaviors is connected to covenant practices. That is what it looks like to love your neighbor as yourself. And that is what it looks like, right? Is taking care of each other, treating each other well. So the off the charts, I think, sometimes unhinged anger and judgment at such behavior is justified because it makes God angry when you're not behaving properly, right? But it is connected to, it is a part and parcel of being a part of these people. Is the covenant relationship means we're in this together, right? Very much simplified. So a good portion of the content of the prophets is calling out bad behavior, threatening people with death or their own punishment if they don't get their stuff together. And sometimes, this near future prediction of the Assyrians coming to town and conquering everything, right? Or so-and-so doing something like that, right? And then after the southern kingdom is conquered by Babylon, who gives a rat's ass about the northern kingdom people? After the conquest, the Babylonian conquest, right? That's when the people who are writing these texts, so we're getting the concerns that they have, then the content is about comforting the people, a promise of restoration in the near future. And the book of Isaiah is a great one to read for that, because the first 39 chapters are pre-exile. Chapters 40 to 55 are during exile, and chapters 56 to 66, are at the end of exile and leading into restoration. So where does the book of Jonah fall into that kind of wind-swept timeline? And I actually don't know the answer to that. I'm like, oh, wait. Well, I could look that up real quickly. Actually, hang on. Sorry, this is one of those things you'd think I would look up ahead of time. Just didn't occur to me until I was saying it. I was like, oh yeah, that would be a good idea. Let's see. The thing about Jonah, so we're just going to jump to this point. The whole thing about focusing on obedience makes a lot of sense why people do that, but that's not. The question is obedience to what, really, if you want to be generous. Really, the purpose or the message of the book of Jonah is that God also loves your enemies. And I'm not a fan of the enemy label. I don't like labeling people an enemy. I don't like the divisive us-them mentality that supports that idea that there are people out there who are our enemy. It's very present in our current political context in the United States. So it is unsettling to me. I publish about that. I write about that. I talk about that. But historically speaking, in that context, to come out and basically say God loves even your greatest enemy, why isn't that, which is the main point of the book, why isn't that the message we're teaching children? We might do away with a bunch of the psychopaths, the people who develop into very non-socialized psychopaths or sociopaths, right? Okay, so I don't remember, location in the canon. Oh, here we go. The book of Jonah was written by an unknown. Its language places in the Second Temple period. Oh, so post Persia taking over and restoring the temple. That's fascinating. Its vocabulary and syntax corresponding with those of the Bible's later books, Aramaic sources, and rabbinic literature. The book was apparently written after the destruction of the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, which happened in 612 BCE. Since it refers to that city in the past tense, notice that. We'll all pay attention to that here as we read through it. And the king is not called the king of Assyria, but the king of Nineveh, an inappropriate title. The book should be dated no later than the 3rd century BCE. All right. So there you have it. There are discussions about Jonah. There are discussions about everything. Daniel, Jonah, all of them. That's fine. I'm not interested in that so much as more trying to give you a general sense of what's going on here historically, the content of it. So let me just say it one more time and then we'll read through it. The book of Jonah is about a new face on who Yahweh is. It is about expanding God's compassion. So up until this point, we have 1,000+ years of tradition or whatever saying that these are the chosen people, these are the people God cares about. And now, post Babylonian exile and return from exile, we have a story that is talking about God also loves those people you despise. Wouldn't it have been nice if that's what you heard on Sunday mornings? If that's what you were coloring something about? Being led to be compassionate with, to find a way to get past your differences with whoever, right? So, and okay, and this is not unusual either. Thank you for putting this in the comments. I appreciate that. 777 Jessica Smokes 777 XOXO. That's quite a handle. I was told as an older teen when I started going to church that Jonah was a prophecy of Jesus. We didn't look at the text though. And I imagine part of that prophecy was the fact that he was in the belly of the fish for 3 days. And so that kind of is a prototype or a, foreshadowing of Jesus being dead 3 days and being raised on the 3rd day, actually. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead and read the story now. And I'm just going to point this out now. And then as we read it, the idea that this is about obedience comes from just the first 2 chapters. But you have to read to the end of the book to get the full picture of what the book is up to, right? Okay. So let's go ahead and read this. Well, I wanted to start off with this, which is how just 4 translations give, what heading do they give to the book in general or to this specific chapter? And you may have caught it before I scrolled up a little bit, but so this middle one, or the third column, is the King James. Actually did not give it a title. Thank you for that, actually. The New Revised Standard Updated says Jonah tries to run away from God. Or I think the second one is the New International. Let's go see. Yeah, New International. And then the Message. I threw the Message in there just because I was curious what he was going to say. But the New International, the second column, says Jonah flees from the Lord. And then the Message on the far right, running away from God. It's very interesting, right? I'm going to read just the New Revised Updated, but there's no perfect translation. We'll just be clear about that. And people keep asking about that. I'm like, yeah, that's another topic for another day. Okay, let's read the story. All right. Now, the word of the Lord, let me zoom in here because that's kind of small as I look at it this way. Let's see is that better? Let's see. Yes, that's much better, huh? All right, so I'm just going to stay over there because it's going to take a lot of scrolling. So the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, "Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." But Jonah set out to flee to Tarshish, which is in the opposite direction from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa on the coast and found a ship going to Tarshish. Think, in the direction of Morocco or Spain or whatever. So he paid his fare and went on board to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. This is also interesting to note because this tips a hat to this belief that the gods lived in certain places, right? It's not just the ancient Greeks who did that, who said that, the gods are up there in the pantheon and the little thing in the sky, but you'd have there's a different thing of having a patron deity associated with your city, but then there's a whole other kind of more encompassing, this is where the Lord lives, is here in Jerusalem. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and such a mighty storm came upon the sea that the ship threatened to break up. Then the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his God. They threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. Jonah, meanwhile, had gone down into the hold of the ship, lowest part of the ship, right? And had lain down and was fast asleep. The captain came and said to him, "What are you doing, sound asleep? Get up and call on your God. Perhaps the God will spare us a thought so that we do not perish." Everybody is calling on their gods and you're down here sleeping. This is another element of something that we see playing out in the depiction of Jesus in the Gospels, right? When he and his disciples are on a boat crossing the Sea of Galilee and he's asleep, right? So, Christians are often taught to read this as predicting that behavior or something like that. But really, I think it's more appropriate to say this was a trope. This was an idea that was out there and people are using it over the centuries, right? And so they use it to say something about Jesus as well. The sailors said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots so that we may know on whose account this calamity has come upon us." So they cast lots and the lot fell on Jonah. Isn't that interesting too? It's kind of fun the way people, this magical or just entirely random thing, right? Then they said to him, "Tell us why this calamity has come upon us. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you? Like, what's your story, dude? Come clean so we can address the problem here," right? He said, I'm a Hebrew," he replied. Also worth noting how late this story is and the fact that they're using this label Hebrew still, right? Now, right, so yeah, just gonna leave that alone for now, but worth noting, right? Because we're into the point where you're calling the people Jews already. So we've gone through Hebrew to Israelite to Jews, but he's still calling himself a Hebrew. Just worth thinking about. "I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." That's a thing that pretty much all the dudes on that boat would say, right? Just so we're clear, even though they all had different gods. Then the men were even more afraid and said to him, "What is this that you've done? In what way did you piss off your God?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord because he had told them so, right? So then they said to him, "What shall we do to you that the sea may quiet down for us? Look, dude, you've brought this problem to us. We're sympathetic to your issue, but right, like we need to address it or we're all going to die, right?" For the sea was growing more and more tempestuous. He said to them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great storm has come upon you." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to bring the ship back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more stormy against them. Then they cried out to the Lord, "Please, O Lord, we pray, do not let us perish on account of this man's life. Do not make us guilty of innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you." So they picked Jonah up and threw him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord even more, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. I'm not going to touch all of the different, I mean, they're just interesting implications here, right? That all of these sailors are now like, oh, we're going to start worshiping this god now. It's good propaganda, right? But the Lord provided a large fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Oh, right. This is the beginning of chapter 2 in the Hebrew. And therefore, in a Jewish Bible, this will be chapter 2, verse 1. 3 days and 3 nights. Of course, this is what one of the people was saying in the comments, but also worth noting that when you get to the story of Jesus, he's not dead 3 days and 3 nights. He's killed on Friday. He's killed on day 1 and buried, and on the third morning, the morning of the third day. So he's really only buried for 48 hours. I'm just saying, we should all be clear about this. Anyway, what happened there? I wanted you to go to the next chapter. You didn't want to do that. Okay. Let's try it this way then. So that was the first chapter. Let's see what Jonah chapter 2 says. And there are only 4 chapters. This won't take long. Oh, a psalm of thanksgiving. Oh, that's fun. Because the word psalm means song, right? I find that interesting. I wonder, that probably is not in the superscription for the Hebrew. Yeah, no, it definitely wouldn't be, because it would be. Yeah, I'm not going to look it up. There's no way it's in the Hebrew. Okay, so chapter 2 then, Jonah. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish. So he's been swallowed, saying, I called to the Lord out of my distress. See if there's any part of this that you actually can identify with. Let's just remove this whole thing from the context of a Hebrew Bible book that is trying to do something other than teach you obedience. And I'm just going to ask for a moment if there's any part of this that you can relate to. Okay. I called out to the Lord. I called to the Lord out of my distress. So you can switch out the God language for something else, right? And he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol, I cried, and you heard my voice. You cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight. How shall I look again upon your holy temple? The waters closed in over me. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head at the roots of the mountains. That's not somebody who's in the belly of a fish, you know what I'm saying? I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought me up. You brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. As my life was ebbing away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who worship vain idols forsake their true loyalty. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will pay. Deliverance belongs to the Lord. Okay, I'm not a fan of a lot of what's going on here, right? And this concept of sacrificing to gods, right? It's about keeping the gods happy, all that stuff, yada, yada, yada. But the ideas that are also at work here in terms of the imagery of the deep swallowing you up and being just sinking to the bottom of the sea, right? Being wrapped up in the reeds and the weeds of the sea, and just like, it's an interesting way to talk about depression or some form of trial, right? Suffering in life. So, right. So he's in the belly of the fish and contemplating his mortality and realizing he is at his the depths of the sea, right? Then the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out onto the dry land. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time, saying, "Get up, go to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to it the message that I tell you." Mm. Yeah. Oh, did I get the microphone wet? Oh dear, I did. Oh dear. Okay. My mouth is really dry today. Sorry. Did I tell you? So Jonah set out and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now, Nineveh was an exceedingly large city, a 3 days walk across. I don't know about you. That's a really big city. I don't know how far they think you can walk in a day, but it's easy to do a 10-mile walk. Just that. It's easy, right? I mean, if you've got a whole day, I can do that in 3 hours, 3.5 hours. Like that's a huge city for 3,000 years ago, right? Just saying. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's walk, and he cried out, 40 days more, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed God. They proclaimed a fast, and everyone, great and small, put on sackcloth, a way of showing you're repenting, right? When the news reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne. That's that reference to, right? Not the king of Assyria, but okay. Removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. Let me back up again. So this reference to the king of Nineveh, how that's an inappropriate label, is probably because there's no longer a king of Assyria to speak of. So the misappellation there is probably just due to ignorance, not being aware, right? Okay, anyway, so he covered himself with sackcloth and sat in ashes. Then he had a proclamation made in Nineveh. By the decree of the king and his nobles, no human or animal, no herd or flock shall taste anything. They shall not feed, nor shall they drink water. Humans and animals shall be covered with sackcloth, and they shall cry mightily to God. All shall turn from their evil ways and from the violence that is in their hands. Who knows? God may relent and change his mind. He may turn from his fierce anger so that we do not perish. If we turn from our evil ways, we might deflect God's anger. It's also just making really interesting claims about the way God works and the way that people believed that God's worked, right? But there you have it. Jonah went, gave the message, they heard it, and they responded, right? When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil ways, God changed his mind about the calamity that he had said he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. How many people do you know are aware of the times a human or humans' actions changed God's mind? This and the one in Exodus 32 are the first two that pop into my mind about this. Right? Moses talks God off his wrathful anger ledge, and also in Genesis chapter 18, right? Abraham talks God out of trying to destroy two cities, right? Anyway, and then Jonah chapter 4 is just the most interesting, and it's the one least read because people stop at the end of chapter 2. And this is another really interesting example of how misleading labels can be, right? When if you're told that this is about Jonah's anger, you're going to miss that it's about God's compassion, right? Jonah's not just angry, he's petty. He's behaving like a child, right? I mean, it's just kind of annoying to me to read this part. But we're going to read it because we need to. So God saw them repenting and decided not to destroy them, and this was very displeasing to Jonah, and he became angry. I just need to comment one more time about this. That people I know on the committee, on the updated edition committee, like I know people. I had a conversation just 3 years ago with one of the people on that committee. Oh, it's 4 years ago. While they were in the midst of this updated edition, that people decided that this was about Jonah's anger. It makes me really cranky. because even the story itself says it was displeasing to Jonah. I mean, he's annoyed at God's compassion. This is not about Jonah's anger. And it just bugs me that people get to decide those labels to these chapters, and it's misleading, and it contributes to more division, right? And more hatred instead of and keeps us from seeing that this is actually kind of an interesting claim to make about God at this the God of the Israelite people at this point in time. So he was annoyed, and he prayed to the Lord and said, "Oh Lord, is not this what I said while I was still in my own country? That is why I fled to Tarshish at the beginning, for I knew that you're a gracious and merciful God, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love." What's that, Jeremiah 30, 33, something like that. "And relenting from punishment. And now, O Lord, just take my life from me, for it's better for me to die than to live," implied, and see this compassion just poured out on Nineveh. And the Lord said, "Is it right for you to be angry?" Then Jonah went out of the city and sat down east of the city and made a booth for himself there. He sat under it in the shade, waiting to see what would become of the city. The Lord God appointed a bush and made it come up over Jonah to give shade over his head. I mean, this is like, the beanstalk, Jack and the Beanstalk. I mean, it's just growing miraculously if it's all happening in like a day or two, right? To give shade over his head to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was very happy about this bush. But when dawn came up the next day, right? This is like, that's magic, right? It's just God appointed a worm that attacked the bush so that it withered. When the sun rose, God prepared a sultry east wind. Does that mean it's blowing from the east to the west? And the sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint and asked that he might die again. "It is better for me to die than to live. This is awful. God is being compassionate. God is giving me comfort and taking it away, the bastard." Right? I mean, it's just, he's so petty. It's irritating. But God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the bush?" And he said, "Yes, angry enough to die." What kind of drama king is he anyway? I called him a drama queen one time, and I appreciate that a student called me out on that. Like, I don't like the negative evaluation of females here. This is, yep, you're right. Drama king. "Yes, angry enough to die." Then the Lord said, "Are you concerned about you are concerned about the bush for which you did not labor and which you did not grow. It came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" It's kind of a weird, attack there. "Who do not know their right hand from their left." I mean, did you have to insult them right there? And that's the ending, right? And so that's why I'm thinking someone like, Nikki made a comment like, "I just don't understand what this book is up to." So not a perfect story, okay? But this last part, let me like reduce it down just a little bit here. This last part is what it's up to, right? This is what the story is doing. Even if it could have used a revision or two, right? I mean, this would get about a C in a writing class, but what is it doing, right? Why, the issue of holding on to your anger, right? I love all those different ways of thinking about anger that I learned from people in Eastern contexts, not Western, that come from a more like yin yang or balanced worldview, or even just different from the Western mentality, right? Which is, anger, you're the only one who's injured by anger. That's not true. Also, the people around you, when you have anger that's festering inside you and you are rude and angry and lash out, but you're the person who is most damaged by anger. I think there's some healthy examples and healthy times of anger, in particular when it is something deep inside you that is coming out in a protecting you versus defensiveness. When you're angry at having been mistreated for, over and over and over, that's a very different kind of anger than what we're seeing here. And this kind of anger is petty. This kind of anger is what fuels things like an eye for an eye, right? And death penalty reactions, revenge, that kind of stuff. And people will tell you, if they're honest with you, right, that this idea of vengefulness doesn't alleviate the pain of your loss, right? It doesn't actually bring justice. That's what this is about, right? Do people who are part of the Israelite people, the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah, like, do they have a right to be angry that the Assyrians conquered their ancestors? This is not really something I think I have a right to speak on, but I think that there's a comment or a conversation to be had there, right? Do people get to be angry about how their ancestors have been treated, right? Do you get to do that? And do you get to hold a grudge for centuries on their behalf? Yes and no, right? I think it does. Excuse me. I think it does matter what kinds of things happened. An empire taking over another another land. I think this is worth being upset about. And I specifically, the people that are popping into my mind are Native Americans, or people who were living on this continent when the Europeans came in and slaughtered and intentionally, aimed for genocide, right? Like, I think you get to hold on to some anger there. But also, even with that, as unjustified and horrific as that was, it still continues to play out for these people in horrific ways, right? But even in that, which kind of anger is actually productive? Even in that, very justified anger, right? If it just is eating you alive because it is that kind of awful, right? That's also not helpful to you. Anyway, so what is going on here? Someone in the community that was willing to have different kinds of conversations about this covenant relationship that the people of Israel, so the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah, the people that become the Jews, like, people in their communities were willing to have unorthodox conversations about who God is and whether or not they were the special people of God, and whether or not God was actually actively always choosing them, or was God also interested in loving other people. And so, this book is an example of challenging the status quo, or the ideas that were typical at this point, right? You worship Yahweh, Yahweh has your back, things will go well. If things are going badly, it's because you've broken the covenant somehow. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. And this is stepping out of that framework. So from my perspective, it's welcome. It's not a very good ending, right? But saying that, there are people in this city, why shouldn't I also be concerned about them? That's, I think that's kind of lovely. Within the realm of thinking that there is a God who does interact intentionally, like with intention and in these kinds of ways, right? I don't think of there being that kind of a realm, but historically speaking, in their context, this is a welcome development, right? It's very different from the issue of obedience. And so from that lens, then you look at what happens the first 2 chapters, and you've got all kinds of interesting things happening in terms of someone literally running from being the messenger of redemption. Who does that? That's the extent to which you hate these people. That is a message that does relate to today. We can bring that into our current contexts, right? And call that out. Like this I don't there's not much about the story I love, but I do like the threads or the bits at the heart of it, right? This guy would rather die than see his enemies treated well or forgiven. He would literally rather die. It makes me uncomfortable and queasy. And yet, that is entirely relevant to contexts today, right? So it's a story that gives one of plethora of human responses, or I would say shortcomings, failings in terms of relational ideals. It puts it on a, kind of puts it into a context of, all these things that these ancient people believed about the way the world worked, right? Jonah heard God telling him to go speak repentance basically to the Ninevites. And Jonah was like, no, I know God is compassionate. I'm not doing it. That's on Jonah. That's not just about him not obeying, right? I feel like I need to be clear about some of this. That's not just about Jonah not obeying. That's about Jonah not having it in himself to want good things for people he dislikes. And he may have historically sound reasons to not like them, but they are still human. That is what I see there at the end of chapter 4. The writers, the wisdom people, whatever, are saying they're still human, just like you. Get over yourself. What if that was the message we had children being taught through this book? I mean, there are plenty of ways that applies today. So it's not about him not obeying. It's about him being petty and small-hearted. That is the issue. It's not about obedience. The reason he fled is he did not want something good for people he disliked and had a hatred for. Period. That's what the first 2 chapters are about, as well as this other thing about throwing in, the utter depths of life and, the struggles and suffering of life and how it feels like it swallows you whole. Like that's something we can relate to too, right? And that in the midst of that, or in the depths there, you might cry out in general, not to someone or something, but just cry out. You might find reserves somewhere within you or from people around you to find a way back to the surface, right? And that's very real. And, all right, let's try this again. Nope, still don't want to do it. Still kind of annoyed that that people want to give this group of people I don't like a second chance. No, I don't want anything to do with that. That's what's going on. Jonah is not just disobeying. It's not even a surface level reading of it, right? That's people who want a story to be able to tell their children to obey. I mean, that's not, this story isn't about that. Right? It's about the pettiness that is a part of some people's way of thinking. So, maybe there's a nugget to take away from this to help someone. If you end up interacting with people of faith, people of these monotheistic faiths, maybe there's a way for you to direct them to reconsidering a petty response that is devoid of human appreciating the dignity of all human life. I don't know. All right, let's see. I agree. I agree with your comment here, Akio. Even if God can be merciful, maybe if even God can be merciful, maybe you can too. Depends on knowing a lot about God's history. Agreed. But I think so. Here, I don't know that you've been here a lot. You may have been here a lot in the past, but I'm not interested in redeeming anything in the Bible. But I do think that this is a particularly interesting story for looking at slightly more complexly, because what people are typically told it's about is just not what it's about. And I have no interest in, supporting the idea that the way God, that there's a God who's talked about in these scriptures, and I don't need to support that image, that idea. That's not my thing at all, actually. Just the opposite. But in the midst of it all, in their context, right, giving them the benefit of the doubt that this is a development of thought for that group of people at the time. And that is a piece I will affirm. Of course, I don't think it goes far enough, right? And I would say that about writings in the Newer Testament, because the writings in the Newer Testament are still embracing this us versus them mentality, and very well. So there's a reason why a lot of Christians today are still stuck in that us versus them and fearful and defensive and lots of antagonism kinds of dynamics, right? So I gotcha. Yeah, I don't disagree. Fern Love Bond. That's such a fun handle, by the way. But I don't, right? It is interesting, right? Because the moments when it's dropped into the narrative, God is merciful, abounding in steadfast love, and all this everlasting, blah, blah, blah. But that's like 2 verses after he's just promised wrathful whatever, to be poured out upon people. Very much an abusive, an abusive tyrant. The epitome of an abusive partner, right? Especially when Israel, the people of God, are often depicted as being the bride or the woman to this God, right? In terms of spousal relationships, it's awful, 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 awful. I'm not saying that I think that God is actually merciful, but people do cling to those 1 or 2 verses that say that. And ignore all the other bad stuff, basically. And so it's like the only thing they see is this stuff about God is loving. But the preponderance of evidence to the contrary undermines that claim. Okay. So that's it. That's my take on the book of Jonah. It's not perfect, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it is not trying to talk about being obedient to God's call. It is trying to talk about, in my opinion, and in the opinion of most of the Hebrew Bible scholars that I would talk to about this is a book about God, a change and an expansion of how these people viewed their God. And to say that this God was now also embracing other nations, or was compassionate to other nations, or extending love and forgiveness or whatever, in the context of descendants of people who've been colonized by that country, like that's a really powerful thing to sit with for a minute, instead of just dismissing it outright, right? That there were people among the Israelites or Jews who were writing a story that says, let's get beyond our animosity at what's been done to our ancestors here. I mean, and how we are still suffering from that or affected by that. Like, let's get beyond that. Like that's an element I can kind of get on board with, if you know what I'm saying here. All right, there's an exchange happening, so I don't know the whole context here. So I have this tendency to jump in and pick up one comment, and I misunderstand it's a part of a longer exchange here, so I don't want to do that today. Any questions or comments? I think very differently. Okay, yep. See, they're having an exchange, and I almost responded to one of them like, nope, they're not talking to me. Okay, so that's it. That's the book of Jonah. Thank you for being here. Thank you to those of you who are supporting me in all the kinds of ways you do. I appreciate when you like a video, when you subscribe to my channel, when you invite someone else to watch a video of mine or subscribe or like or comment, all of those things give other people out there in the YouTube verse a chance to potentially see my stuff and learn about my stuff, and they might also like it. I appreciate my patrons. I appreciate the people who are supporting me financially. Even I appreciate the $3 a month people as much as the people who give me $50. Like, I'm grateful to people who are supporting what I'm doing. Makes it possible for me to keep doing this. So thank you to all of you who are able to do that and want to do that. And just the general banter here, the general support for my work. I'm just grateful. So thank you all. If you're watching this later, thank you for watching. I don't assume that people always make it to the end of the video, by the way. I should be saying all this at the front, right? I always just want to jump right into it. So thanks for being here. I'll be back next week doing a conversation, probably a similar story time to this, reading up parts of the book of Esther, I think is what we're going to do next week. So thank you. And let's wrap this up with a little love. Thanks.